the podcasting component that you've done with it. I think you're 700 plus episodes.
I got a very flat bottom from sitting down so much.
Yeah. And yet you keep going, you keep learning about it. And I mentioned to you before, like one of the reasons I just enjoy this is these types of conversations. Why do you podcast? Why have 700 plus episodes? You've obviously gotten into a lot of your whys already, but just that thought alone on podcasting.
I think on podcasting, it's that I'm curious. At the end of the day, I get to meet amazing people like yourself all over the world. I've had 300 guests on the show, and I learn something new from every one of them, Eric. And that's an amazing gift to be given. Every day that I have a podcast with somebody, they share with me something that they've learned, right? And my podcast for me is just like, it's an amazing sort of college. And people are giving me one-on-one lessons. And I've had people who run big companies, people who run small companies, women entrepreneurs, ethnic minorities, people in India, people in America. And I get an amazing breadth of experience that I could never possibly, as a white, middle-aged man in the West Country of England, get access to.
Yeah.
So the podcast is just this amazing, like, college of life for me, where I'm kind of getting one-to-one tuition with people that I've defined as being the tutors that I would like in my life.
Yeah.
I interview individuals that are doing interesting things as entrepreneurs, and I get to ask them one central question: how do you get noticed? There are many other questions I could ask, but that's the thing that I would like to know. And so the podcast as a platform gives anybody who's a host the opportunity to reach out and get answers from people that they otherwise might not get a chance to talk to.
Yeah.
So it's an amazing platform. And then, you know, what I do is I make these into articles, then into books. So I've got 2 books published so far with Wiley. And so it's just an amazing kind of value chain where I get to meet interesting people like yourself, Eric.
Yeah.
Learn some things. And then the final part of that is that I get to share what I've learned with other people who otherwise wouldn't get to meet those people.
Yeah.
And I think that's something we haven't talked about, Eric, is serving others. And all the sort of self-actualization is great, but it's pointless if I'm selfish with it. So one of the missions that I have is that I can talk to people from around the world, get their wisdom, and I can share it with other people who wouldn't be able to get that on their own, as the articles, as the books and the podcast. So
yeah.
In that sense, the podcast, it's a microphone and a mic and a screen. It's an amazingly powerful way to kind of transcend geography and ignorance.
It is. When you think about the power of it, the audio coming through the ears of someone listening to you.
Yeah.
And when you talked about brand before, there's this consistent message, the consistent tone, consistency with you, Jim, with a lot of people that you hear. When you listen to Joe Rogan, it's very consistent in how he thinks about things. And once you've listened to many, many episodes, you get it. So if I called Joe on the phone, I would feel the same and no different. You know, I've seen it with businesses where these large companies, they tout customer service or they tout diversity, but then you talk to them and it's like, that's just a line that they're putting out there. It's very inconsistent when you call the airline to say, no. There's some very large disconnect that's going on here.
Yeah.
Whereas an entrepreneur in a small business, we have the opportunity, and really a must, to have a consistent message, to keep it, you know, what if you hear me on a podcast, if you read a blog post, if you talk to someone who works for us, right? If you talk to me, there's consistency in that. No different. If you're going to have 700 plus episodes, you're going to get your message, your tone. I'm going to understand it. So when I do finally talk to you or someone on your team, I'm going to know what I'm dealing with right away. And I think that's super powerful as well. And the gratitude, the enjoyment, the get to attitude that you have with all of it, like that's inspiring. That's what keeps someone like me. I could listen like, wow, I can keep going, right? Like, why stop now? This is too much fun. And And maybe it's not even fun. It's the, like you said before, the learning, the education that you get of having an individual that you get to talk to, who's talked to 700 plus people, who's run businesses, who's written books, who's asked all sorts of questions. I get to spend, let's say, 45 minutes, hour, what have you, with that individual. I couldn't do that without this microphone.
Well, we'd be in a bar somewhere.
For sure. Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, it gives everyone really an excuse to call, right?
Yeah.
And the access you get because you've got the mic and the credibility of the show does put you in a different league. And I think from a positioning point of view, as an individual, it does give one the opportunity to have sort of some stature. So if you say, I'm just going to chat to you in the bar, that's nice, but I'm kind of thinking it's a little bit transitory. And do I really want to invest that time in that conversation? But if someone's got a podcast and they've got a track record, and you can see what they've done with the website, and you can see what they've done with the show notes, and you can see what they do transcript, you can see how professional they are, you can see how consistent they are. Actually, you can build a really good profile of whether you want to be talking to that person or not. And that person is really sort of creating an embodiment of their personal values within the podcast. And that sends a very big and clear message to the person who's going to come and talk to you. Yeah. Right? So I love what you're doing with the show. And you come across as being professional and organized and considered and engaging. So I'm going, well, those are kind of some pre-qualifications for me spending my precious time with somebody, right? So the podcast gives us some, if like, pre-qualifications in a world where we're maybe bombarded with invitations of social media with various bits and bobs. Having a podcast and podcast hosts is kind of like becoming a club, right? Well, there's some barriers to entry here. Eric has got a podcast. I've got a podcast. We're in the same tribe, right? We must have some similar values. And I think that's also a great aspect of the podcast.
Content Matterz with a Z is our content marketing company that helps entrepreneurs tell their own stories to those who care. And here's the thing. We think every entrepreneur that is willing should have their own content platform. And we want to help make that happen, both by working directly with entrepreneurs and by sharing our own stories, exploring the craft of content marketing. Content Matterz, one piece of content at a time. Learn more at kazcontent.com.